Hey everybody, this is Carlos from Miami Firm Body, and this is this week's audio journal. In classes at Miami-Dade, my students have been working on this very difficult topic, their last essay for the semester, and the question is, who am I? Yesterday we were talking about it and trying to figure out an approach, and I kept on telling them that a lot of times we try to answer that question with who am I, with an answer of the roles that we play. And ultimately, the roles that we play are not really who we are. I'm not a teacher. I'm not necessarily a father or a son or a husband. I am more than the roles that I play because my roles change, right? Sometimes I've seen students try to write about that with the answer of chronology. I was born in this city, I went to this school, I've done this at this time, and sort of trying to piece together the identity through this notion of chronology. And my answer to that is sort of the trying to answer who we are, sort of with the answer of our chemistry, right? So we have iron and manganese and sulfur and who knows what other chemicals we have, and we probably are like $5 worth of chemicals if we were to reduce ourselves to our chemical composition. But we know that that's a reduction, right? So in the same way, our chronology really isn't the answer to the who am I question. So I've been exploring this book for a while now. It's like on and off for a couple of years. It's called A Course in Miracles, and I'm actually in a part of the book where the book is reviewing a bunch of the lessons, because it's a book about awareness and awakening. And so I'm actually in lesson 56, and this morning I read this, and it goes something like this. How can I know who I am when I see myself as under constant attack? Pain, illness, loss, age, and death seem to threaten me. All my hopes and wishes and plans appear to be at the mercy of a world I cannot control. Yet perfect security and complete fulfillment are my inheritance. I have tried to give my inheritance away in exchange for the world I see. But God has kept my inheritance safe for me. My own real thoughts will teach me what it is. And so as I read the lesson, or the review of that lesson from prior lessons that I've read in that book, I was brought to I came back to what we were talking about yesterday in my classes. And as I was saying to my students, how there are many things in our lives that often open us up to see the reality of the world, or the reality of what we are, in a different way. And one of those things is death. And a number of students have pointed to the death of loved ones in their family. One student suggested that death can make us stronger. And I also suggested that it could also weaken us, in the sense of we could be traumatized by the loss of a loved one. It all depends on perspective. But I wanted to direct my attention, or their attention, more towards the role of what death can do for us in terms of shaking the the seemingly solid perspective that we think we have of the world. And death often pokes through the screen so that we could see the film of our lives a little bit more clearly, the projection of our life. And in one regard, we could see that in many ways, this life as we live it is extremely short. Even with a very long life, human life, let's say 90 or 100 years old, it's not that long. I told my students about how, for me, death has been a very important part of my life. I lost my dad when I was 18, and his death really opened up this door that reminded me that everything was very ephemeral and very temporal. And from that point on till now, I've always thought of sort of life as a bit of like sand coming through the fingers, or very watery, very dreamlike. And in many regards, I haven't been very much afraid of death, in part because I saw that life continues even after my dad passed. But in one way, I've always been wrestling with this notion of, well, then what does it mean to live this life if it's going to be meaningful? If everything that we do in the end really turns to nothing. I often ask, will we be remembered 100 years from now? Will there be a memory of us? Will somebody know our name? And maybe somebody will, but most likely we will be forgotten, maybe even sooner than 100 years, or maybe a little bit later than 100 years. But over time, our memory will be gone from other people's minds. And so we're left with this question of, well, then what does it mean, right? What am I doing with my life? If it's not for legacy, if it's not for perpetuity, what am I doing living the life that I'm living, right? And a student remarked yesterday saying that it sounded very nihilistic, what I was saying. And I think this is what I'm trying to clarify, right? That in many regards, I think death and this question of meaning is so powerful, and it leads us to sort of treating whatever we're doing in our lives with lightness, and not really holding on too dearly, because we know that everything is going to pass. And so if everything's going to pass, then how do we live? And this is where some of the things that I've learned from yoga and some of the teachings from the Bhagavad Gita in reference to attaching to the results of our actions. And the Gita explains that we should live our lives wholeheartedly and with great conviction, and doing all things with great effort. But ultimately, we release all of our results of our efforts to God. We don't hold on to them. And that, when I think of that, I think it's the part that makes sense in reference to living a life that ultimately is satisfying, right? We know that we cannot hold the results of our actions. They will not. They're not up to us to hold. But we can act, and we can act in love. And as we do, maybe this is where today's lesson 56 in the Course of Miracles, maybe we can begin to see a different kind of world, one that is not threatened by loss or by death. And as we begin to see the world slightly differently, or maybe radically differently, we begin to relax a little bit, enjoy a little bit more, and be of greater service to other people. I read another article today about yoga, and it was a research study on the effects of yoga on prison inmates and their their issues with depression and anxiety. And it pointed to how 10 weeks of yoga can definitely change, or definitely did change, the participants' view of the world around them. And so how do we change our perspective, right? When we might be stuck in this fear mode of seeing the world, really projecting out of our losses, out of our fear of our losses. So how do we come into seeing the world differently? And my answer to that is that, at least what I've noticed in myself and in many of the people that do practice yoga, that yoga is one way to do that. There are countless others, but it's definitely a very practical way to helping us release the attachment to the results and relax into the what is, and then let go of the projection of fear and of anxiety into the world around us, so that we can begin to see and have a clearer vision of a magnificent place full of possibility, full of opportunities, even as we work really hard in living our lives well. Who am I, right? That's the question I'm asking my students. It's a question I come back to for myself, and maybe it's a question that you want to ask yourself, remembering to let go of chronology, to let go of roles, and then we're left with the exploration of what we are, and that points to the magnificence of a new possibility of being. I hope this message is one that is good for you, and I look forward to seeing some of you at yoga this week, and if not, talking to you as we bump into each other either online or face to face. You take really good care.